The Mighty Die.
Hello everyone, this is Leon from the Mighty Die YouTube channel with more battle reports. It's a special one this time because Marcel, Steve and I went to a tournament yesterday, so I'll be doing what will either be one long video or a series of smaller videos where I talk about, first and foremost, of course, the games that I played with my army, but also a little preamble on which army I took and what kind of thoughts and goals I had going into this tournament, which is this video. So like I said, tournament, it was the tournament in Neumünster, which is a tournament that Steve and Marcel have been before. It's fairly close to where we live in Hamburg, and they had some good experiences so far. So after some convincing on their part, I decided to join, and this was my very first War Machine tournament ever. So quite an exciting thing to look forward to. It's a fairly small tournament. It has 16 players. Normally, I think this tournament goes over 4 rounds. For some reason, they decided to do it in 3 rounds this time, which I'm actually quite happy with because 4 rounds is just a lot, especially if you don't have any tournament experience. I've done some fantasy and 40k tournaments in the past, and I still recall how tired I felt after a 3-round tournament. So yeah, cool. So it was a Steamroller 2017 tournament, and as you guys might have seen, I recently switched from playing Butcher 3 to Harkevich. So going into the tournament, I think that maybe Butcher 3 would have been the better choice if I was really planning on winning some games. But I am not such a big fan of Butcher anymore. Firstly, because I just played him quite a bit against Steve Signor army in recent months. And I'm just really keen to get some experience with a different caster while still supporting that kind of Jack theme. Yeah, I also feel that Butcher doesn't do so much for his army. Of course, he has Energizer and Silence of Death, which are both really, really great spells. But against an opponent that has played Butcher 3 before, it's also a fairly predictable caster to play against. The threat ranges are very predictable, and like I said, with that experience, it's not too hard to mitigate some of that threat that even Butcher himself brings to the table. So yeah, I was keen to try something else, but of course that did mean that I was going into this tournament with only 2 games with Harkevich under my belt, both of which were featured on the channel. They were against Steve, and I also lost both games. So that was definitely a good start to my Harkevich learning curve. But that's basically also the main reason, or that actually formed the main goal for me going into the tournament, is simply to get more practice with Harkevich. It's like I said, 3-round tournament. Normally it will probably take me about 5-6 weeks, depending on the time of the month, to get 3 games in. And again, most of those would be against Steve, so against Signar. So this is just a really good opportunity for me to get more games in quicker, and also see some other armies, which I'm very interested in, and see how Kador specifically and also Harkevich actually does against other armies apart from Signar, because almost all of my games in recent months have been against Signar, since our own group sort of disbanded a little. So of course Bent hasn't been on the channel for a long time with his Retribution, and also our resident Krix player lost interest in the game for now. So it's just been Signar. So I'm very happy to see what War Machine is actually all about without having to play against Signar. So again, Hark practice, very happy, very keen to get some practice in. And the second goal for me is just to see how I like tournaments. I think over the past years of playing War Machine, and before that Warhammer 40k and Warhammer Fantasy, I've always preferred to have a more casual game setting, so either at my place or at a friend's place, and just sit there for a couple hours, have fun, roll some dice, and play a good competitive yet casual game. So I don't really know how much I like the tournament experience. So that was yet another thing for me to find out. So I think that's enough for my personal goals going into the tournament and why I decided to take Harkevich. So onto the list. So Harkevich is accompanied by his war dog, and his battle group consists of first of all Behemoth, then 2 Juggernauts, 1 Destroyer, and 3 Kodiaks. And then I also have a Widowmaker Marksman and 2 Manhunters. In this case, the War Dog and all solos, so the Marksman and 2 Manhunters, are for free because of my theme benefits of Jaws of the Wolf. And yeah, so 7 Jacks, a couple of solos. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to play the more optimized, or what I see as the more optimized or better version of this list, where you have the Forge Seers in there, 2 Forge Seers actually, one that is then marshalling the Behemoth. I think most players online know this list by now. And then I would also have a 3rd Juggernaut instead of a Destroyer. But all models are quite hard to come by at this point. So I wasn't able to actually have those models yet. So I'm playing a slight variation. I'm quite happy with the Destroyer. I think you could offer some ranged threat next to Behemoth. Marksman is a fairly good model anyway. It's just the Manhunters are not really what I want. I played with them in the past, a long time ago, and yeah, they really never did all that much. And now I actually had to buy a 2nd Manhunter just so that I could actually play this list, even though I did not really play my first Manhunter in probably more than a year and a half. So that's the list. My overall strategy for the list is that Behemoth is basically a Harkevich babysitter, a 2nd or even 3rd wave Jack that in the beginning protects Harkevich by giving him Iron Sentinel, in combination with a War Dog that actually makes him a fairly tough Warcaster to assassinate. He would be immune to knockdown, and he would also have a very high defense and armor. So unless your opponent can, throw away Behemoth, slam him, push him, or otherwise remove him out of base-to-base contact with Harkevich, Harkevich is actually fairly difficult to assassinate. Then of course the obligatory 3 Kodiaks that create a nice big cloud wall in front of my army, which means I can move up further without being shot at or even charged. And then 2 Juggernaut just for the extra punch, probably like a 2nd wave pieces. And like I said, the Destroyer just adds some range threat to what Behemoth already puts out. So especially with scenarios that have an objective, both of them can probably take out the objective in 1 turn, which is quite useful. Because I've already noticed in past games that I don't really want to miss a melee Jack in the center of the board just so that I can take out an objective and score an extra point. And in this case, I also have a few solos, so those might really come in handy in games where I have to score some points on flags, where I don't want to expose my caster too much depending on where the flag is. So that's a general idea. I already thought of a standard deployment, an army deployment that I wanted to try out every single game to see how I would like this. In this case, a pretty brick deployment, which you'll see later in the games. I practiced unpacking a couple of times, both based on going first and going second. So that I have that as a sort of automation, so to speak, without thinking all that much, so that I can basically do deployment as well as my first turn in about 2 minutes all in all, which is a vast improvement from my general deployment and first turn timing, because we will be playing with Death Clock. And yeah, so I have had a little bit of preparation. I also went through all of the scenarios real quick and decided on a general game plan for each scenario. So where would I deploy, which models I would dedicate to which zones, sort of high-level strategies that I really want to try to stick to regardless of what my opponent does. I think I also mentioned this in previous games where I do have a plan going into the game against Steve in this case. And as soon as I see his deployment or first turn moves, I completely abandon my plan and start reacting to what he does. One goal going into this tournament is really sticking to the plan I made beforehand, which of course makes maybe the plan a bit static, but at least I can see how the deployment and general idea of my strategy work or don't work in certain scenarios, instead of always going for something more customized on the fly. So that's, I think, the introduction to the tournament, and as well as my army list. And I'll be back soon with the battle reports. Stay tuned. So this is my first game. I was paired up against a very nice gentleman who played his Retribution army. His pairing was Helena with some sort of Manticore spam, and Kaelissa, the Night Whisperer, with a double Sentinel list. So something I forgot to mention in my first video, I had a pairing as well. I had, of course, Harkevich, and I also had a Sorsha 1 list with me with quite a bit of shooting, out of theme shooty list. But the only reason I took this list was just to throw opponents off. Maybe they had a reason for not wanting to play Sorsha or wanting to play against Sorsha. Like mentioned, I really only intended to play Harkevich because of the practice. I wanted to see how he does in different scenarios. So I only really had that list on my sheet to mess with people's heads. But I think in hindsight, most people really dropped the list that would do well against Harkevich. So I really don't think that the second list made any difference. So in this case, after seeing Helena as well as Kaelissa, I of course saw that the double Sentinel list was going to be the list of choice. In that case, maybe under different circumstances, I should have dropped Sorsha, but like said, I'm really going all in on Harkevich this tournament. So I did expect him to play his Sentinel list. So, as you can see, deployment, this is going to be my standard deployment in every single game. Harkevich on the front lines, Behemoth behind him, and then all the Jacks are basically in one row. Most notably the Kodiaks towards the center, and the Juggernaut and Destroyer on the flanks. I put everything in the center, and he basically goes very, very wide with Sentinels on each side of the board, trying to go into those zones, contest them, and his solos as well as his Jacks are more in the center. Quite a lot of terrain on the table, as you can see. I think there were 12 or so pieces, so really, really heavy terrain. Both sides also have a forest, so you can already see where both of our casters will be hiding for most of the game. Yeah, that was it. So I took pictures at the end of every round, more or less, so not every turn, which might be a little bit confusing, but yeah, I just didn't really think about taking more photos as I was so focused on actually just playing the game and not making any stupid mistakes. So my opponent rolled the roll-off for choosing first or second. He chose to go first, which meant that I could choose sides, and I chose the side with less water features, and also a trench pretty close to my own flag. In that case, that's also where my solos went, because that would be a nice opportunity to score some points on my side of the table without having to expose my caster, especially considering there are Sentinels on that side of the table. So my opponent went first. He moved up his Sentinels all the way into his own zone. His Jacks also ran forward, and on the right flank his Sentinels also ran forward. So a pretty straightforward first turn. And then going into my first turn, I do what is a very typical Harkevich first turn, at least if I go second. So I trample forward with all of my Kodiaks, pop smoke, reposition back, and then put most of my army behind those smoke clouds. I also move a Juggernaut into the trench on my right flank, trying to threaten the incoming wall of Sentinels, as well as one of his heavy warjacks. I'm not really sure what that guy is called. He does also have 2 banshees. I want to say, yeah, 2 banshees in the center there. So yeah, very standard first turn. Then going into the second round, his sentinels move up quite a bit on the left flank. This means that they can threaten my flag at this point and could start coming into the center, which is not good news because I don't really have all that much on that flank to halt their advance. In the center, his chimeras move up closer. I think he's planning on taking shots at my caster, because Kalissa has this spell where one model can ignore line of sight. So this forest that Harkevich is trying to hide behind doesn't really mean much if you have a 17-inch threat range on those models. And also on this right side, again, his army moves up, and considering sentinels are also quite fast, he's positioning them in a way that he can charge across the zone and go into some of my jacks. So on my left flank in my turn, I decide to charge in my Manhunters into the sentinels, as well as send in my my destroyer, because I really want to hold up that flank, because I do want to score some points. I'm really pushing for a scenario in every single game. At least that was my plan going into the tournament, because of course that's one of Harkevich's main things. So I do want to really start scoring as early as possible. I also went second, so that means that I have a little bit of a head start. So I can't really have those sentinels make their way across the table and prevent me from scoring some easy early game points. So yeah, those guys go in. I believe the Manhunter does manage to maybe take out a Sentinel. The other one had to run, so he's just holding them up. And also the Destroyer I had to run, so he's just engaging Sentinels. Also, I sent my my Kodiak all the way across the zone into his Banshees, again to stall them. And on my right flank, I send in a Kodiak that runs forward and then engages his heavy warjack and a number of his sentinels, while the other Kodiak tramples forward. He vents steam, so that's the cloud you see there, and that takes out, I believe, 2 sentinels that were standing in that zone. I was also trying to kill the sentinel on the right, because in that case that would have given me 1 point, but I failed to actually take it out. So apart from this one model that's still in that zone, I don't score that point, which would have been very nice. So this brings me to, I believe, 1 control point. Also something worth noting that in this turn I popped feet. So a number of my jacks are sitting on a very comfortable armor 23, but here I also realize that I definitely made some mistakes. I blame my lack of practice. In this case, I pop feet, and then of course it's a nice idea in certain circumstances to what I did, run and engage, and then hold up their battle line while they have trouble actually taking out those jacks blocking their path. However, I did run them out of my control range. So I think in this scenario, the Destroyer on my left, the Kodiak in the center, as well as the Kodiak that is holding up his heavy warjack, and his sentinels on the right flank are now out of my control range. So especially exactly those jacks that were meant to just sit there and be annoying and armor 23 actually don't benefit from the feat. So well played, Leon. Then going into the next round, I realized that the Sentinels have Vengeance, I think it's called, which didn't matter a whole bunch, but it does mean that he can move around a bit more freely than I thought. So what he does on the left flank, he takes out my 1 male Manhunter and then charges my marksman that was sitting on my flag very, very easily with his sentinels. He fails to kill the second Manhunter, so she's still sitting there, and then he tries to do as much damage as possible on my Destroyer. which he damages, but he stands firm in his zone. Then in the center, like I said, I moved the Kodiak out of my control range, so he's actually not sitting on a very high armor. So between those two Banshees there with full focus, they of course take out my Kodiak. Then you see that on the right side, the Kodiak that was trying to stall his advance is also taken out. Again, just the armor 20 and a lot of sentinels and the big Jack with lots of focus. So that was expected, but I wish that he could have lived maybe one more round with those few points of extra armor. Then on my turn, I can of course see that my left side is collapsing as expected. So I start to shift things to my right. So you can see me moving Harkevich to the right a little bit more out of that threat range of those sentinels. And I also move the Juggernaut through the forest towards my right flank to further support that push on the right side. I have quite a bit of armor there, so I'm hoping to take out those sentinels and the Jack so I can score some points on that zone on the right. Then what I do here is that I trample my Kodiak towards the right side of my zone, and then vent Steam to take out the sentinels that were standing there, which means that I cleared the zone successfully, and I managed to then score an extra point, bringing me to 2 control points. It's also worth noting that my opponent was playing Iris 2, as well as which means that he could disrupt my Jacks fairly easily. So I believe he kept doing this to my Juggernaut in the center, and also now he's taking aim of Behemoth. So between Helena and also her reload, and then having Iris in his list, he's disrupting and or making stationary, I think, 2 of my Jacks a turn, which isn't great. Not used to playing Iris all that much anymore because, again, themes don't typically allow her. And yeah, it's a good. I definitely recall now how annoying she was in the past. So I'm sitting on 2 control points right now. I think right now he hasn't scored a single point yet, but of course now with his left flank being fairly open, he's probably in a good position to start scoring as well. Then going into round number 4, I did actually remember to take a photo at the end of his turn and at the end of my turn, so that makes the progression a little bit clearer. In his turn, he took out my Destroyer on the left side, as well as the Manhunter, which now means that zone is free for him to score with his Banshee. Then on the right, his Sentinels charge in Behemoth, which he is very keen on taking out. He doesn't do all that much damage, so luckily I can still use him in my turn to take out some Sentinels, and then his Warjack on the right side manages to really cripple that Kodiak there. Then in my round, I start to have less options. Also scoring becomes a little bit more difficult because I just have the 1 zone, so I'm going to try to clear out that zone, but it's quite hard with what I still have available on the table. So the Behemoth takes out a number of Sentinels. The Juggernaut does as well, so eventually he's left with the 1 Sentinel that's not luckily in the zone. And I try to take out his heavy Warjack that's still in the zone with my Kodiak, as well as a Juggernaut that had full focus. And I do believe here I got a little bit unlucky. I think I missed an attack roll or something, and I leave his Jack on very few boxes. So unfortunately that does cost me another control point. But it wasn't meant to be, because that also meant that between having his caster in the central zone, in the round zone, having Iris on the flag on his zone, on his side, and having his Banshee on his rectangular zone, he's going up enough control points to bring him up to whatever is more than 5 of what I had. So he wins on scenario, and that was the game. Now that the game is over, I definitely realized that there were some things that I could have done better, obviously. and also some mistakes I definitely should not make in my next 2 games. First and foremost, running my jacks out of Harkevich's control range, both for allocating focus as well as for the effects of the feet. I think that was the big mistake in this game. That really that didn't help me put some more scenario pressure on him. I think I should have also put more resources on my right flank. Dealing with 2 units of sentinels at the same time is really too much to ask for. And I think that with maybe 1 more jack on the right side, I could have cleared out his models faster. And then even maybe with my faster solos, go for scoring on his flag instead of trying to hold back his left units of sentinels with very few models. But of course, that's all in hindsight. It was definitely a very fun game, nice opponent that was also nice enough to explain rules from different models and even some potential gacha rules before the game even started. So yeah, definitely a very fun beginning of this tournament. Having lost the last game against Retribution, I am now paired up against my next opponent, which is a Khador player. So despite wanting to get some experience against other armies besides Signar, and I guess Khador, because that's what I play, I do get paired up against Khador, and my opponent is playing Butcher 3 and a Sorsha 1 list. Sorsha 1 is a more shooting-oriented list with a gun carriage and some rockets and some other things I can't remember, unfortunately. And his Butcher 3 list is more of a jack spam list, of course, in Jaws of the Wolf theme. I think he has Ruin, he has 2 Juggernauts, he has a Behemoth marshaled by a Forge Seer, then he has a second Forge Seer just running around, and he has a Marauder and 2 Kodiaks and a unit of Kayazi Eliminators. I think that was it. For me, of course, it's the same army. In this case, I rolled the roll-off to go first or second. I chose to go first, and because I really want to get up the board as much as possible. The deployment is the same as my last game. Again, I'm just going for the same deployment every single time to learn from the experience. We also take both of our advanced deployments away. So his marksman, and I think that was the only thing that had advanced deploy, has to deploy with the rest of his army. But of course, it also means that my marksmen and men hunters have to be deployed with the rest of my army. So we're playing the scenario 5, Outlast, which is ironic because I can't score on those round zones, and he can, but not so much. I think the only thing that can score is his unit of eliminators, and then there's just the 2 flags that we can both score on. So definitely not the scenario I wanted to see. So as soon as they announced that this was going to be the scenario, I was just kind of laughing, like, yeah, sure, I'm playing a jack list, and this is like the one scenario I did not want to play. And then I'm going up against Butcher 3, where considering how much damage output that list and Butcher 3 himself has, it's going to be hard to really out attrition him, which is normally, of course, a benefit for me, but he has almost the same amount of jacks and Butcher 3 on top of that. So definitely a very hard game going into it, but let's see how far Harkevich gets against a caster I, of course, know very well myself. On my first turn, I do what I do. Harkevich moves up 5 inches, casts mobility, and the whole army runs forward. That's a nice thing about going first with this list, is that you can really put your army almost on the center line, which is, for me, having played Butcher, extremely fast. And of course, his list has very little shooting. I believe it's just Behemoth, so I don't have to be scared of anything really reaching my line. So no need to pop that smoke first turn. So everything is 14 or 12 inches up the board. The next photo shows his first turn as well as my second turn, just to make it a little bit more confusing. But his turn is very straightforward. Everything runs forward. And then on my second turn, I have to start being a little bit more cautious of his threat ranges, and basically set up a good third turn for my feet. So nothing can really charge me yet. So what I do is I move my Kodiaks up a bit, and then pop smoke in strategic positions for him not to be able to actually charge me. So you can see on the left side is that the Kodiak puts a cloud wall between the forest and the house. So his Jacks can't really see anything to charge. And I do the same thing on my left side with, on the right side with my two Kodiaks between two forests. So the Juggernaut and Ruin there cannot see anything, and I believe they're even too far away for just walking up and engaging as well. So I'm effectively stalling those two very dangerous melee Jacks. Then on the right side, I run and engage his Eliminator, which of course in hindsight is useless because they have parry. So my bad. I also move my Juggernaut up around the cloud to basically tempt him a little bit in maybe dedicating one of his right Kodiak. And on the left side, I kind of make a mess of things, moving my Destroyer, thinking it was a Juggernaut and vice versa. But long story short, I move my Juggernaut into the water, not too bothered because I, of course, have mobility up, so he can always just move out, charge out, etc. And then the Destroyer sort of hides behind the cloud in the forest. And I believe he takes a shot at the Juggernaut all the way on the left and takes out a few boxes. Lastly, I also move my War Dog to my flag. I did start the game, so I don't score any points this turn just yet, but of course the dog will help me score at the end of my opponent's turn too. So in my opponent's second turn, the clouds that I put down there are really quite a problem for his advance. So he moves up the Juggernaut and Ruin to base with those clouds. They were too far away to walk in it and basically engage my Jacks. Charging was not allowed because, of course, he didn't have line of sight. So I'm quite happy that they're stuck there. Which leaves me in a much better position next turn to do what I want to do. In that case, of course, in my next turn, when those clouds disappear, I can easily charge both Jacks on the left flank. I can charge the Juggernaut with one fully loaded Kodiak, and actually on the right side, I have two Kodiaks that can go into Ruin. So that's a great plan. I have him exactly where I want him to be. Of course, on top of this, as soon as I charge, which would be for free under Harkevich's feet, I'm basically looking at a very crippled Juggernaut. I'm also fairly confident I can take out Ruin with two fully loaded Kodiaks. And on top of that, I then have a couple of armored 23 Jacks standing very close to his flag, also closer to Butcher. Of course, it's then also predictable that Butcher would move forward and with Flashing Blade and Impending Doom take out probably all Kodiaks. But then in this case, I still have a Destroyer and a Behemoth to countercharge with to threaten Butcher if he does decide to do this. So that was my plan in this turn. So again, great position to be in. I think I'm playing exactly the game that I want to be playing with Harkevich. So now it's just all about execution. The behemoth, his Behemoth on the left does take out quite a few boxes on my Juggernaut. Those forward shares really hurt with granting Behemoth +2 power on his bombards. On the right side, unfortunately, his Kodiak took out quite a lot of boxes on my Juggernaut. And on top of this, he is also knocked down. I'm not entirely sure anymore how he got to be knocked down. Oh yeah, he was a headbutt. So smash and grab, and then he headbutted me, so I'm knocked down, and I'm fairly crippled, so I'm not very confident I can actually take out that Kodiak. But nonetheless, the main game is in the center, so I'm keen to execute on my plan, and really start putting some pressure on Butcher. Also, of course, at the end of his turn, I do score 1 point because of my dog that's sitting on my flag. And in his case, he did actually not put a solo in base to base with his flag, so he does not score a point. His marksman is too far away to be moved to the flag, and everything else cannot score on that flag. Butcher could have, but he doesn't want to move Butcher that close to the main battle line, including in that case having a destroyer and the behemoth with arcing fire. So my turn 3 is go time. I think I played my first two turns very well. I positioned my jacks in a position where they can now basically charge 2 very important jacks in the center. I can use my feet to have them charge for free. I can have them repositioned back to avoid retaliation. And then on top of that, he's now facing a whole horde of armor 23 jacks, which is exactly where I want to be, because I want to be taking out 1 or 2 or multiple jacks on his side, and really push that attrition advantage, because there is a Butcher there. So this is really what it all led up to. So I'm very keen to get things started and really push on this critical moment in the game. So I activate, I think I activated Harkevich first. I cast Mobility, and I also allocated maximum focus to all 3 Kodiaks, and then I activate my Kodiaks on the right because I want to charge Ruin, and then I realize I forgot to pop my feet, which means I have to spend focus on charging, which means less attacks, which means I cannot pop smoke after I take out Ruin and reposition back. And it also means that I'm not sitting there at armor 23 with my whole army, and he's probably going to take out a bunch of jacks in his turn instead of me really pushing his advance back. So yeah, shit. So that's not good. Harkevich is definitely all about his feet, and I just messed up. But hey, life goes on. I just figured to not change my game plan. I could have still played it maybe a bit more defensively, stall it out 1 more turn by doing again the clouds and going back and stuff. But I figure let's just go in, take out these jacks in the center, and then see how I deal with the rest later on. So on the right side, both Kodiaks, in this case, charge into Ruin. Unfortunately, now having to spend focus without the feet. And between them, I have, let's say, 4 initials and then 4 more bot attacks. So that's 8 attacks, if my math adds up. So I think definitely enough to take out Ruin on average. And I completely mess up my dice rolls. I have to roll dice -4 for damage, and I rolled 4 or 5, 6, 7 times in a row. So really horrendous dice rolls, and after everything is said and done, both Kodiaks did all of their attacks on Ruin. He's still sitting there with more than half of his boxes intact, and no critical systems taken out either. So that just adds insult to injury of my earlier mistake, and I get quite frustrated at this point in the game. It's just not looking good. And so many bad dice rolls back to back on such a critical moment against such a strong jack is really really changed my mood. But hey, I still have another Kodiak. They're still focused on the one on the left. I can still take out the Juggernaut, but also there the gods of the dice did not smile on me, and I also don't do any meaningful damage to that Juggernaut either. So at this point, I actually considered conceding because, again, we have very similar lists. It's all about attrition. I fucked up the feat and also had very bad dice rolls at a very critical moment. And I was wondering if I shouldn't just preserve my mental strength or endurance for that third game. But I actually wasn't too sure on if that's even allowed with Steamroller rules, and I also didn't know how it would work with points and everything. So I just figured to just keep on rolling dice and see what happens. But I was definitely not a very happy Pandag for the rest of the game. I don't mind losing at all. You guys all see me lose time and time again against Steve. The last many games on the channel. Also, the last game at this tournament, I lost. But all good. But having to face these kind of dice rolls is really very frustrating. But hey, that's how it is. Like I said, I keep on playing. And at the end of my turn, I do score a point. As you can see, I did move also the Manhunter next to my flag, just a precaution in case somebody takes out one of the two solos to keep scoring. And then I hand over the turn to my opponent. So my opponent, of course, had an excellent opportunity here to basically clean house, or at least really create an attrition advantage for himself. What happened in a nutshell is that on the right side he took out my Juggernaut with his Kodiak. He was already badly damaged from the round before, so he just basically cleaned up that flank. Then his Kayazi Eliminators came around the side and wanted to take out my Marksman, who survived on one box. But as you can see, the Eliminators are already crawling around my flank. They are one of the few units that can score for him in this zone. And of course, also I have my caster there, and I know that theoretically Eliminators are quite good of sneaking around the flanks and taking out casters. So I have to be a little bit cautious there. Then Ruin handily takes out one Kodiak. He did not damage the other Kodiak. He did have to spend all of his focus on removing the one Kodiak. So that's one Jack down. And then the Juggernaut on his side badly damages the other Kodiak. I think he's left on 3 boxes. Cortex out, so he's just kind of standing there. However, it does mean that because I still have those 2 Kodiaks there, I am contesting his flag, which is excellent news. And on the left you see that his Juggernaut charged in and he distributed his attacks between the Destroyer and the Juggernaut. The Juggernaut was already damaged from 2 rounds of Behemoth shooting, so he was smart enough to keep hitting the Juggernaut first and taking out his Cortex and Ice Axe. And as soon as that worked, he started hitting the Destroyer. And I think at this point his cannon is crippled, but he still has his axe, so that's nice. As you can see, Butcher is still fairly far back. I think he still feels threatened by maybe my shooting. I think he wished that he had moved him a bit closer to impact the game, but I think he was being a little bit too cautious. Then you can see that he does move his Marksman from the right towards his flag, so he can also start scoring, and he starts pushing up the dogs. The mechanics were also really quite good this game because over the course of 2 turns I did manage to damage his Juggernaut and especially Ruin. But he keeps moving his mechanics forward and then repairing some critical systems like Cortex or that big mace of his. So at the end of the game, he thought he would score a point. But then I do remind him of the fact that the Jacks can also contest the flag, so he's actually not scoring any points. And again, I score a point on my own flag, so that brings me to, I believe, 3 points. And then, it's my turn, seeing what I can still manage to pull off, despite having lost a number of my Jacks and now having 2 or 3 fairly crippled Jacks. So after my very, very bad third turn, I look at the board at the beginning of my 4th, and I figured that the only thing I can still try to do to win with my crippled army is just try to win on scenario, which is ironic because it is not really the type of scenario that you would expect to win on, or even have a good chance of winning on with this list. There's only really that flag, so yeah. But I literally see nothing else. I can't assassinate Butcher. Attrition is not going my way, so just to kind of play out the game, I figured to just to just aim for this and see how things go. So in this case, I just try to do as much damage as possible. I load up my healthy Kodiak facing Ruin and leave him on I believe 1 or 3 boxes. So again, not too lucky there with how the dice rolls work out. This also means that next turn the 2 or 3 mechanics can walk forward and again repair those important boxes. So it's just really not meant to be. But at least I'm still standing there. I'm still contesting the flag. So in the bigger picture of things, of me trying to hold back his jacks and hold back anything that can potentially contest my flag, at least that's working. But I just can't do any meaningful damage or on his jacks to take them out and score some points for having models removed. On my left side, you see that I built a wall of steel. Again, I'm going for scenario now. I'm not really caring so much anymore about actually taking out models. So luckily this time I do remember to use my feat. So all of these jacks, as damaged as they might be, I'll have armor 23. So I hope that he doesn't quite manage to push through those lines and prevent me from scoring points. I have 3 points at this time, so I can of course score 1 more point this turn because there's nothing preventing me from scoring on my own flag. But of course next turn he has quite a few models still to prevent me from taking that last point. So definitely still a stretch, but with so many jacks kind of holding back his jacks, who knows, right? Who knows? On my right flank, Behemoth walks to his Kodiak and badly damages it. I leave him on a couple of boxes because I wanted to spend my last attack on trying to take out that Eliminator that's holding up my Marksman. Because the Kodiak is not really a threat anymore at this point. And the Eliminator can of course sneak around the flank and go towards my caster. But of course with defense 17, it was a long shot. I don't hit her, so that's unfortunately not something that worked out. So at the end of my turn, I move back the marksman that was also on the flag, just in case something happens. I don't want both of my solos to be taken out in one go, so I move him back so that next turn I can run him to the flag and I use him as another scoring model. And then, like I said, go up 1 point, sitting on 4 points right now. I'm still contesting his flag, despite his marksman being there. And I just pray to God that that I can score that last point.
On my opponent's 4th turn, the pressure is basically on for him to make sure I don't score my 5th point, or preferably also score himself. In which case he would have to take out the 2 Kodiaks there that are contesting his flag. So I think this is a turn for him that was quite frustrating as well, because he does realize he made a number of mistakes earlier in the game as well as on this particular turn. Over on the right side, his eliminators take out the marksman, who was still sitting on 1 box. And of course it would have been a better idea to have the eliminators just move away from the marksman and either contest the flag, or maybe even better, try to assassinate Harkevich. We weren't really sure if he had enough range to engage Harkevich with both of his eliminators, but definitely one could have made it. So he could have, assassinated him, or at the very least hold him up, engage him. But yeah, in this case he did choose to take out the marksman, which did not really have any game impact at this point in the game. Then all the way on the left side, his behemoth moves forward further into the zone, and here he also notices that he should have done this a lot earlier because he could have been shooting Harkevich for at least 2 turns. Harkevich is sitting there on a hill, so he has a fairly okay defense, but he could have put that pressure on me at least 2 turns earlier had he moved up more aggressively with Behemoth. Then in the center, which in this case is really what matters most for this game still, is that his Juggernaut does try to take out my Kodiak, who is very badly wounded, but he doesn't manage. The armor of 23 does prove too high to take out the last couple of boxes, and also the other Juggernaut that is fighting my Juggernaut and my Destroyer fails to take out any of my Jack. So my plan on that side to hold him up with a wall of steel does pay off. So my wall holds. Then on the right side, in this case Ruin versus my Kodiak, he also fails to take out my Kodiak. I do believe he actually forgot to allocate any focus to Ruin, so that meant that he wasn't able to take out this almost completely full health Kodiak. So that does mean after those activations end, he will not be able to score any points on his flag yet again. He does move up Butcher a bit more aggressively now. You see him standing close to the flag. Also, he tries to move around his dogs so that they can start contributing. And I guess he was also planning on pushing them through the forest at some point so they can be late game contesting pieces as well. So my plan worked. His final move was moving his marksman through the forest to contest my flag. So I do not go up that last point. I stay on 4 points. But again, at least he didn't manage to score a point. So all I have to do in my turn is take out that marksman to go to 5 points. So on my 5th turn, I do take a few minutes to think about the current game state and make sure that I am really very close to winning, despite everything that has happened. But of course, eventually the way to victory is fairly straightforward. So what I do, I don't actually waste any time on doing anything else than just the game-winning move, which in this case is I move my Kodiak back. In this case, the fairly functioning Kodiak that was engaged by Ruin. I do believe he takes some damage from the free strike, but it doesn't matter so much at this point. So I move him back and I vent Steam to take out the Widowmaker Marksman, which is a nice way to circumvent his high defense. And then on a very average die roll, Vent Steam does take care of his 5 boxes, which makes sure that the flag is now again uncontested. And then my caster Harkevich moves forward and scores the flag. And then I basically end my turn, which would also then end the game, because that brings me up to 5 points versus his 0 points, which means a victory for Harkevich. On the picture, you do see some models being moved already, because this picture was taken after we already discussed a couple of things. In this case, I think Behemoth was actually not that close to my jacks. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier in the battle report already, but apparently he also had a unit of Cossite Woodmen that could have come from the side, which he forgot about. And to be honest, I also completely forgot they were even in his list. So that was yet another mistake that he was a little bit frustrated about, in combination with some of the things he did wrong, in his opinion, that I mentioned in his turn.
At the end of the game, we took some time to discuss all the what ifs. Of course, my opponent became more and more frustrated towards the end, because he did make those mistakes, which at some points were also really critical. But despite both feeling somewhat frustrated, it was still a good game. For me, it was still a very interesting experience having to play against so many jacks. It was also very interesting to play against Butcher 3, a caster that I know pretty well, and now I get to experience the kinds of things you have to pay attention to if you're playing against him. So I definitely feel that I still learned a lot from this game. It's just unfortunate that I made such a critical mistake early in the game, and it does feel like half a win or kind of a janky kind of win. But in my defense, I messed up my plan A, and I moved to a plan B, and it worked out. So despite everything that happened, a win is a win. Let's see what happens in round 3. So in the third and final round, I get paired up against a Cater player. Yes, despite playing Cater myself and wanting to play different armies to see more than Cater and Signar, I get paired up against the second Cater player of my personal tournament experience. So yeah, that was not what I was hoping for, but that's how it worked out. So my opponent is bringing 2 lists. The first one being a Vlad 1 list with all the Winter Guard rifles and Rocketeers and infantry that he could possibly cram in a list, including some mortars and things like this. Definitely not a list I was looking forward to playing, not because I have a particular opinion about the matchup, but just because it is what it is. I just don't think it's probably a very nice matchup to play against. And the second list is Harkevich. So he was actually in the same situation as I am, where he also had forts here waiting to be delivered. But we have definitely some distribution problems here in Germany, and I think even in Europe. So they're very hard to come by. So he's also playing a list that is not quite as optimal as he would have liked. His list is slightly different from mine. He also has the 3 Kodiaks. He also has the Behemoth. He also has a War Dog, which he actually forgot at home. So if you see a small base running around, that's actually his War Dog. And then he has, I believe, 2 Juggernauts and a Marauder. So that's the difference there. And then he has 2 Menhunters, just like I have. I believe he has Kayazi Assassins. So that's another small difference. Also Jaws of the Wolf, so we both negate each other's advanced deploy. And we're playing a scenario, the Pit 2. So both of us can actually score a fair amount of points. With his Kayazi Assassins, he can also score in the center, which is nice. Yeah, let's see what happens. It's definitely going to be a big grindfest. My deployment in this game is the same as what you saw on the rest of the tournament. The only change I made here is that I moved my destroyer to the right flank instead of me just typically putting it on the left for no apparent reason, because I want to make sure that Behemoth and the destroyer are in range at the end of his second turn or my third turn to take out the objective with range attacks, because I don't really want to be forced into dedicating a melee check to his objective. So in that case, I have a better chance of scoring that 1 point than he does, especially after seeing his deployment, because he doesn't have Behemoth on that side, so he can't reach my objective with Behemoth shooting all that easily, and all he puts on that flank to take out that objective to score his point are the Kayazi Assassins. And I don't know the rules that well, despite having played them a few times myself, but I don't think they punch particularly hard. So I can be fairly confident starting my first turn that my objective is at least safe for a little bit, whereas I can be fairly certain I'm at least going to score that 1 point for his objective. Of course, I also have a nice wall on my side of the table that Harkevich can potentially hide behind. It's not in the kill zone, it's further forward, so that offers me some nice protection. There's also a house in the center that blocks line of sight that also both of our Harkeviches can potentially hide behind. And of course most of the other terrain with all the Kodiaks on the table and the mobility on both sides as well is probably not going to bother either of us. So my first turn, I run everything forward. I rolled highest and I chose to go first. and my opponent chose the table side he's on, and almost everything runs maximum distance. I do hold back one Kodiak a little bit because of Behemoth's threat range, and only after I finish activating them I do realize that that Kodiak on the right side of the house is actually within 18 inches of Behemoth. So that's actually a little bit unnecessary in the first turn. I could have just held him back a couple of inches more and save myself some of that initial damage. So my marksman also runs up the hill there on the right, so he can also start contributing to taking out that objective in my turn 3. And my 2 Manhunters move on my left flank to stall the Eliminators. I don't have very high hopes they will actually kill Eliminators, because I'm just not impressed by Manhunters, and I think they're also faster than I am, or they move further. But you know, it's just something to occupy them with. And with that, I end my first turn. So in my opponent's first turn, of course he does what I also expected him to do. It's what I always do on my first turn if I go second, which is basically trample the Kodiaks forward, pop smoke, reposition back, and have the rest of the jacks form a battle line around them. At this point, I also then realized that, of course, he has mobility because he's playing Harkevich, which actually increases the threat range of Behemoth more than what I took into consideration. So he can actually already shoot a number of my jacks, not just the one I mistakenly put too far forward. And in this case, he decides to take aim on, well, not actually take aim because he moved, but to shoot at my destroyer. Because he does realize that this is the only ranged threat for now. It's threatening his objective, so he's taking off a fair amount of boxes on my destroyer. And on the left flank, you see his Kayazi Eliminators approaching my zone. He put them outside of my threat range. I think he put them on 10 inches, which means I cannot charge them next turn. And on the right side, you see his Manhunters also creeping along the flanks. And I think this is where the game starts becoming a little bit messy. This is my end of turn 2, and there's just going to be clouds all over the place. So I'm actually okay with how things are turning out, because I had this first turn, so I'm further up the board. And like I mentioned before, he popped his smoke, blocking off line of sight and charge lanes to his models. But this house in the middle and the other terrain pieces are actually a perfect choke point for line of sight for me to put clouds in. So, and it also then prevents his jacks from charging mine. And like I said, I have a very good chance with the models I have to take out his objective. So it already puts me 1 point ahead. Whereas, again, like I mentioned before in the introduction of this game, his Kayazi Eliminators are probably not going to do all that much with my objective. And as soon as I just take out those Eliminators at some point in the game, I can easily score that zone while being 1 point ahead minimum from his objective. And then I have a bunch of jacks in his zone to just keep contesting. So I feel I have a slight scenario advantage here. And if I can just hold back his army by putting those clouds down, I think I will end up on the more advantageous side of this game. So in this round, as you can see, my Kodiaks move forward. On the left, I put a cloud right next to the house, which prevents line of sight to my back lines. And the Kodiaks on the right also move forward slightly and put 2 clouds back to back, which also prevents Behemoth from seeing my Kodiaks or my destroyer, because those shots do really hurt. So that's I think a nicely positioned cloud. And then of course everything repositions back to be sure he cannot see me, charge me, or shoot at me. Behemoth also walks forward, and I believe before I put those clouds down, I try to shoot the Manhunters. But of course, logically, because they have stealth, the bombards drifted, but the dice rolls were too far to still hurt them in any way. Then on the left, Of course, I do want to take out those eliminators because I want to start scoring that zone as fast as possible. Unfortunately, my Kodiak is too far away to contribute at this point, and I also needed him to put that cloud down. Clouds are, of course, a perfect way, or venting steam is a perfect way to get rid of eliminators because they bypass that high defense. So I do really want to keep that Kodiak for later, so I can just easily get rid of those pesky women. But I move my Juggernaut to that side, so my Juggernaut can potentially engage them and get rid of them, despite their absurd defense in melee. And I do move my Manhunters actually away from them because I don't want to throw them away. I can charge them, they can charge me, they would take me out fairly easily. So I decide to move them to the other side of the forest. And that was all in all my turn 2. So in his second turn, also not so much happens. As you can see, the clouds are getting a little bit confusing. There's now overlapping clouds, and we have to pay attention to which cloud belongs to who. On the right side, I was a little bit scared he would actually put a cloud in front of the objective to take away my line of sight, but luckily he didn't. Not sure if he didn't realize that would have been a smart play, but he was also quite cautious to protect his behemoth from me actually seeing him. So on the left side, he puts his eliminators in the zone, at least one of the two, which then means, considering that he is a second player, prevents me from actually scoring that first point, which is very, very unfortunate. But apart from this, not much to report in this turn. Luckily, his Juggernaut in the forest there on the left side, he's actually too far in the forest to see out of it, so my jacks on the left are actually still safe. The only way he could use that Juggernaut to charge out is if I were to move one of my jacks much closer to his Kodiak there. But for now, it does mean that I can move freely around my zone without that Juggernaut being able to charge me. So in my third turn, I can actually start scoring some points. So my plan here is to use Behemoth and the Destroyer to destroy the objective. So that will give me 1 point. I actually thought it was 2 points. So I proudly claimed, yeah, I scored 2 points. And then he reminded me that it's actually not 2 points, it's just the 1. Unfortunately, because that would have been amazing. And of course, on the left side, my main priority is to take out the eliminator that's in my zone. So I can also score a point there, which would bring me to 2 versus his 0 points. At the same time, our lines are now fairly close, so it's about time to pop feet, because his jacks can actually now walk through a cloud and do some attacks. So yeah, definitely a lot of things and a lot of important things to do this round. So on my left side, I give my Juggernaut 3 focus, and I walk towards the Kiazi Eliminator. I need to hit 10s, so I know it's going to be maybe a little bit risky, and in this case I can buy enough attacks and boost attack rolls to hit the Eliminator. But on my first roll, I roll 10, and I easily take out the Eliminator. So I clear my zone, so I'm already securing that 1 point for myself. I also run back my Manhunters just to be annoying. I do put one in front of the Eliminator. Of course, it has parry, so that's useless, but what else to do? And I move one Manhunter more towards his side, just to have it in a more aggressive position for later. Then my Kodiak on the left, he actually just puts a cloud exactly where his cloud was. Again, it's a nice choke point to prevent line of sight to my zone with all of those jacks there in the back. So I was okay having that cloud sit there. I did indeed manage to take out the objective. On the previous turn, he did actually take out my Manhunter, not a Manhunter, the Marksman with a drifting Behemoth shot. So that was not cool. But I still had Behemoth and Destroyer for that, so I did manage to take out the objective. Actually, between them shooting, I actually left it on 2 boxes, which was very annoying. But then I used a Kodiak to take off the last couple of boxes. So that is what the Kodiak on the right did, and then he popped his cloud and also moved back behind the cloud. So not really what I wanted to use the Kodiak for, because I could have maybe also attacked his Kodiak, but I really wanted to secure that 1 point, and even that ability maybe later to score in that zone if I manage to clean things up. And the second Kodiak, again popping some clouds there to prevent line of sight to Behemoth, or at least not have Behemoth shoot at my lines. I did pull back my Destroyer a little bit just to make sure that Behemoth doesn't take out any more boxes, because it's really starting to hurt. And here's also where I start making the bigger mistakes. So, of course, now we're close enough so that he can actually move his jacks into melee with me, which is fine. You can just buy more initial attacks, especially with Kodiaks. And I forget to pop feet. So that's not great. Actually, it's really bad. Because his Kodiaks on the right are close enough to my Kodiak, so he can damage them a lot. He can throw them out of the zone if he wants to. Also his Kodiak on the left and a Marauder, they're all too close for being on armor 20. So that's not cool. But that's how it plays out. So hopefully he doesn't do enough damage, and I can still use my feet next turn and use it for a later turn swing. So in my last round I scored 2 points, and now in his turn it does really work against me that I did not pop my feet, or better said, that I forgot to use my feet. As you can see in the photo, there's lots of knockdown tokens. Kodiaks really like throwing around other jacks, so that's exactly what happened. So on my right side, you see that one Kodiak is gone. He took out the Kodiak, and the other Kodiak he basically threw outside of the zone and threw him against Behemoth. So that Kodiak is now knocked down. We put a base there instead because they didn't actually physically fit next to each other. It also means that Behemoth is knocked down. And then, of course, he also vents steam and repositions back behind the cloud, at least with one of them. The other one, as you can see on the right, is standing inside the cloud. His Manhunter also kind of comes to the left. He actually helped kill one of the Kodiaks, who was standing in front of the Kodiak and next to the Manhunter. So that's not great. He actually had some nice rolls on the charge attack, so the Manhunter actually did something. Then on the left side, you see that he again moved an Eliminator into the zone, so that I again don't score a point on my turn, which is very annoying. Sorry, that I don't score a point at the end of his turn. And there also he was throwing around Kodiaks. So the Kodiak there that was standing next to the house, he moved forward, he did a bunch of attacks on him, and then in this case threw him against the Juggernaut, which also means that the Juggernaut is knocked down, as well as my Kodiak. They're not too damaged because I didn't really allocate much focus to those jacks. She only went in with like 1 or 2 focus on them, which was a bit surprising because I typically get too eager if I know I can actually attack a jack and I just give him lots of focus so that I actually take out or at least most of his boxes. But my opponent seemed quite comfortable going in with 1 or 2 focus, mainly focusing on the throws, and then not being too concerned in taking out those jacks as fast as possible. But yeah, so unfortunately he now scores 1 point for the zone on the right. The center zone is still contested, and the one on the left I'm not actually scoring because he moved his Eliminator in there. So yeah, still really unfortunate I didn't pop my feet. Wouldn't have prevented any throws, but definitely would have prevented my Kodiak from dying on the right side, and also would have prevented a fair amount of damage. But let's see what I can still do in my next turn. So at the beginning of my 4th turn, it really starts to become a very long, grindy game. It's already been taking quite a while now, and there's all these clouds being placed. In some cases, 3 on top of each other. So it's getting a little bit ridiculous with all of these jacks and Harkevich versus Harkevich. But you know, we're both really trying to play for the attrition, and because our lists are also so similar, it really feels more like chess because the lists are so similar. So it really does matter who in this case just uses their pieces better and who positions them better. So last game I forgot to feed, which was very unfortunate because it did cost me a jack and a bunch of damage. So I definitely have to feed this round. First of all, for just being tougher on his next turn, first and foremost, and because the jacks are now starting to engage each other, so I really need this armor buff. But there's also a couple of jacks I want to charge and take out, so I don't want to be spending any focus just for the charge to actually reach them. But I activate Harkevich. As you can see, he's very comfortable behind the house, benefiting from Iron Sentinel from the behemoth standing next to him. And then I start doing my other activations, and I think I actually take out the Eliminator in my in the zone first. So I will be scoring that 1 point in my turn. And as I go to the second Juggernaut on the left, whose plan it is to take out the Juggernaut in the forest, I recall that I again forgot to use my feet. Which isn't great because we're really now in a scenario, like I said, our battle lines are close and we're starting to take out models. So it's so dumb that I forget to use my feet 2 turns in a row. And I can already predict at this point that by the next turn, or in my next turn, I'm not going to have that many jacks left where the feed really matters all that much. So that's really, really bad. However, again, not much you can do at that point. So my Juggernaut on the left goes in, doesn't do all that much damage against his Juggernaut. Again, having to use a focus also for charging. Then the Kodiak figured he can return the favor by starting to throw his jacks around as well. So he goes forward, he hits his Kodiak a couple times, and then throws the Kodiak on to Harkevich. I was actually hoping with maybe some lucky dice rolls I could knock down Harkevich. But of course Harkevich is now sitting on defense 16, I would say, because of Iron Sentinel. So of course that misses, and the Kodiak scatters off a little bit and is knocked down. It would have been awesome if I managed to knock down Harkevich, because that would have actually given me an assassination potential with Behemoth peeking around the corner of that house there, so he could have moved around and then taken his bombard shots on Harkevich, because he would have had line of sight. But as it is, he's still sitting on defense 16, I think. So it's just too tough right now to go for the assassination, which I would really want to do, because with me forgetting my feet last turn, it's not looking very, very good for me at this point. And the points also don't rack up fast enough for me to really get that lead, so that would have been a very nice little escape for me. But as it stands, at least the Kodiak is knocked down and a little bit further out. And on the right, as you can see, we're going back and forth with the 2 Kodiaks, popping smoke and doing our thing. The Destroy goes in, does some damage on the Kodiak. And the other Kodiak also pops smoke, does some damage to his Kodiak, moves back behind the cloud. And both of my jacks are in the zone, contesting, making sure he doesn't add any more points to his score. And at this point, I have 3 points, 2 for being in my zone twice, and 1 from the objective, and he's sitting on 1 point. So in his 4th turn, we really notice that things are starting to swing in his favor. It was just really bad that I forgot to pop feed two turns in a row. And I'm really start to run out of armor to provide much of a defense. Of course, with some knockdown models on both sides, Jumpstart is actually a great spell to save some focus. for normally getting rid of that knockdown. So that's what we've both been using quite a lot as well, especially me in my last turn. But here in this turn, it really starts to play part that also my positioning is not so good anymore. So he was actually able to draw a line of sight past my clouds to some jacks, which I thought I positioned better. But again, it's the end of this third round. My brain is quite tired, and I'm starting to make these small positioning mistakes more and more. So on my left side, he managed to take out my Juggernaut that was there, and then pushes his jacks forward to start preventing me from scoring and filling up that left zone with his jacks. So that's not great. He also throws away my Kodiak again, so who's knocked down, but he's not. The throw was too far to throw him against the other Juggernaut, but it's definitely gonna prevent me from scoring the rest of the game because yeah, I cannot really deal with those 3 jacks now. Then in the center, unfortunately, he could draw a line of sight to the Kodiak that was standing there. You could see past the cloud with the Marauder. So he went in, charged past the cloud, or at least drew a line of sight past the cloud and took out that Kodiak. That was very bad play. Should have put that cloud closer to the building, of course. And then with reposition, he's also now engaging Behemoth. And everything else on his side helps take out the destroyer and do additional damage to that Kodiak that is now dead. So it's not looking very good. At the end of his turn, he scores 1 more point in the zone on the right, and I really have to see how I can still pull off a win because it's not looking very good right now. So on my turn 5, I finally remember that I have a feat, and I use it. It's not going to do all that much anymore by now, but you know, who knows? Maybe it still protects my jack from a little bit of damage next turn. So there's not really much I can do apart from continuing to score points. So on my left side, I have to take out the Juggernaut as well as the Kodiak to score some points there. So my Juggernaut takes out his Juggernaut, and I want to throw away his Kodiak with my Kodiak, but I believe I didn't win the roll. I didn't win the strength check, which is very unfortunate because yeah, would have been nice if I just could throw him out and score an extra point. Then of course, even if I score points there, it wouldn't put me in a winning position. So I figured if I could maybe get some line of sight to Harkevich to go for an assassination, but that wasn't possible because of course the Marauder was still engaging Behemoth, so I couldn't move around him and shoot him. For a moment, I thought I could actually just move around the Marauder and just shoot Harkevich, but of course my opponent reminded me of the fact that I'm still engaging Marauder, so that didn't work out. So I had nothing else to do with Behemoth than just punch the Marauder a few times, so I did manage to remove him, but of course I'm now staring at 2 Kodiaks, a Manhunter and a Behemoth, so that's not amazing. I do engage Harkevich with my Manhunter at the top of the screen, and then the War Dog, the always faithful War Dog, countercharges the Manhunter and kills him, which is very typical for what War Dogs typically do in those situations. However, as tough as this chick is, I rolled a 5, and she's there knocked down. Then on his turn 5, I did forget to take a photo. At this point, it was already quite a long game, and we were both very tired. He, of course, sees an assassination potential. So what he does is that he charges the Behemoth with Kodiaks and throws him away. In this case, I think he even threw him against the wall, which exposed Harkevich to a double boosted bombard shot from Behemoth. And with that, took out Harkevich quite easily. And then, yeah, so my opponent won on assassination at the at the end of the 5th turn. So in hindsight, I think that me forgetting to feed on my 2nd or 3rd turn was really the game-defining moment. Up until that point, I think we both played a pretty tight game, and that really gave the advantage to him in that attrition game. So that was not very good, especially not because I forgot it 2 turns in a row. With that, I think he rightfully won this game. The game itself, it was interesting because again, it's a fairly similar list in the same caster, so it was an interesting game. Very strategic in terms of positioning and some piece trades and scoring points. But it's not necessarily a game that you really want to be playing all that much. It's very long, it's very grindy, predictable even to an extent. So I think we both agreed that we don't hope to be matched up in the future with similar lists. But all said and done, my opponent was a very nice guy. Really enjoyed the game despite the loss. And that also concludes my first tournament experience.